Hello, everyone. My name's Nick Taylor. I'm the director of the Martha Heasley Cox Center for Steinbeck Studies, and you are watching the Fall Steinbeck Fellows reading here on Zoom. Please click yes to record the session. We'll be posting these readings a little bit later for everyone who couldn't make it here tonight. All right. Let's get started. I want to start by thanking Dean Shannon Miller of the College of Humanities and the Arts here at San Jose State, and Dr. Noelle Breda-Williams, the chair of the Department of English and Comparative Literature. And most of all, I want to thank our benefactor, Dr. Martha Heasley Cox, for whom our Steinbeck Center is named and whose brainchild the Steinbeck Fellows Program was. I'm going to give you a thumbnail history of the Steinbeck Fellows Program in a minute, but first I want to call to your attention a couple of upcoming events. The San Jose State MFA program is having an open house on Tuesday, December 15th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. Just go to the Department of English and Comparative Literature page and get the link there. You can meet MFA faculty and learn about San Jose State's MFA program in creative writing, which is distinguished for many reasons, but perhaps most of all because it is a dual genre program where students study in two genres, choosing a primary and a secondary genre from offerings in fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction, and script writing. Tonight we'll be hearing from 3 of the 6 Steinbeck Fellows, and I want to plant in your mind and your calendar a date where you'll hear from the other 3 in the spring. That's Thursday, April 22nd at 7 p.m. Most likely here on Zoom as well, but who knows? Maybe we'll be back on campus then, but I think probably we'll be on Zoom. We'll be having readings by Rita Chang-Eppig, Bryce Particelli, and Kate Osana-Simonian. All right, now for the promised history of the Steinbeck Fellows Program. John Steinbeck was not Martha Heasley Cox's favorite author. This comes as a surprise to many people, but her favorite author was not Steinbeck. She was, however, a student of American literature, a professor of American literature, and believed that Steinbeck, as the most important California writer of his time, ought to have a scholarly center near his stomping grounds. Furthermore, she noticed that Wallace Stegner had a fellowship program dedicated to him at Stanford down the road. And she thought, well, if Stegner can have a fellowship program, Steinbeck certainly ought to. And so she started thinking about what kind of fellowship program she could create and name for John Steinbeck. She was inspired by something that happened in Steinbeck's life when he was struggling after dropping out of Stanford twice, struggling and trying to become a writer. His father kept him from starvation by giving him a small allowance every month for most of his early 20s. It wasn't much, but it was enough to allow Steinbeck to continue practicing his writing because his father believed in his talent. And Martha wanted to do something similar for emerging writers here in the Bay Area. So she plowed her considerable fortune into endowing a fellowship program for emerging writers, and in particular for writers who need time to work on a particular project. Steinbeck Fellows are invited to apply from anywhere in the world. There is no prerequisite of degrees or credentials, but the competition is very strong for these fellowships. They receive a $15,000 stipend and time to write. Usually, They're on campus meeting with our classes and doing these readings in person, but this year is a little different. So our Steinbeck Fellows are meeting with our students virtually and doing their readings that way as well. This is the first time we've done a virtual Steinbeck Fellows reading, and I'm delighted to have here today 3 of the 2020, 2021 Steinbeck Fellows in Creative Writing. I'm going to ask each of them to read for 10 or 15 minutes, after which we will take questions from the audience. So if you want to ask a question, and you want to ask it with your own voice and your own face, just type the word question into the chat, and I'll put you in line and I'll call on you to ask your question. If you'd prefer to just type your question out and have me read it to the fellows, that's fine too. Put that in chat. Okay, so you can do those anytime while the fellows are reading, but we'll probably head into the Q&A session about 40 to 45 minutes from now. Okay, so let me introduce our first reader. Tammy Delatorre has been recognized with numerous literary awards, including the Peyton Prize, the Slippery Elm Poetry Prize, Cut Banks Montana Prize for Nonfiction, and Columbia Journal Fall Contest Award. Her writing has appeared in Los Angeles Times, The Rumpus, Vice, Hobart Online, Arts and Letters, Lunch Ticket, and The Nervous Breakdown. She earned her MFA in Creative Writing from Antioch University, Los Angeles, and during this fellowship, she is working on a memoir. Please join me in welcoming Tammy Delatorre.
Thank you, Nick. And I just wanted to say how thankful I am to be part of the Fellows program. It's been such a gift to be able to have dedicated time to write during this chaotic year. As Nick said, I'm going to be reading from my memoir in progress, which I actually hope to be finished with by the end of the year. And I'm reading from a chapter called I Am Coming for You. I am coming for you. My mother might have said those words that night she went after him, the bearded man, the one she took to her room all those nights. He would come over after I'd gone to bed. She'd carry me from her room, the only place I could fall asleep, to the room across the hall. In the sticky Hawaiian heat, I'd wake to their loud moans and groans in the middle of the night and sit straight up in bed. At 6 years old, the only thing I knew of sex was a glimpse I got on TV, 2 bodies moving under a white sheet. The room I was in was not my room. My room was my mother's room. I was afraid of the dark, afraid of being alone, but I also knew I couldn't go in there with them doing what they were doing. Still, I got out of bed and sat with my back against her bedroom door and fell fast asleep. I am coming for you. I repeat these words like a mantra, like a prayer, like a blessing. I am coming for you. What I'm actually doing is driving in the early morning in Los Angeles to the gym. There is little traffic. I am going fast, wanting to be reckless, wanting to wrap my car around some pole rather than to think the thoughts I'm thinking. I am coming for you. It crosses my mind that revenge is not a reason to write, and yet it is the reason I am writing today. That morning in Hawaii, when I am 6 years old, the door I fell asleep against is pulled away. I look up, smiling, expecting it will be my mother, but it is the bearded man. Listen, you little brat, your mother doesn't need you hanging around. He digs his fingers into the soft, pulpy part of my arm, digs until his fingers hit bone, until I wince with pain, until he's dragged me across the hall to the room that is not mine and throws me against the bed. He pauses for the briefest moment, considering if there's more to be done to me. Stay there, he says, and shuts the door. I do not come out until I know he is gone, his deep voice absent from down the hall. In the living room, I find my mother lounging on the couch, body relaxed and loose, eyes dreaming, smile crooked like she's about to lie. He makes me happy, she says. Do you like him? I shrug, wanting to show her the red welts he's dug into my arm. Oh, don't you want Mama to be happy? I do, but why does it take him? Why not just me? After my sister was taken away by Child Protective Services, after my father left, I slept with my mother in her bed, skin to skin, her sweat, my sweat. I long to know her in this way again, a time when a barrier to her body did not exist. Her hard muscles against my soft belly, her pelvis against my thigh, her clavicle a resting place for my arm, mine, all of it. That was my happiness, but I nod anyway for hers. I am coming for you. I did not see it happen. I did not see him hurt her, and yet she was hurt. I found her unconscious on the living room floor, a red eye swollen shut, a bloodied lip. This was what I knew of love. This was what I learned from her. I am coming for you, motherfucker, because that's exactly what he was. He fucked my mother all those nights and gave her a black eye. He took everything from her, and he took her from me. Weeks after I found her unconscious, her bruised eye had begun to heal. I sat in her lap, my fingers drawn to the puffy flesh above her cheekbone. She swatted my hand away. Don't, she says, it still hurts. The plum purple had faded as if melting into her. I looked at the rest of her body, her breasts, belly, and hips. Where had it gone? Deeper. I pressed my hands onto her chest plate and saw another bruise burning a midnight blue through her skin. I want one, I said, as if it were a bright colored tattoo from a Cracker Jack box. You shouldn't want to hurt, but I wanted to be just like her. I am coming for you. It must have taken a lot from my mother to plan a murder. First, the psychology of it, wanting to slit someone's throat or shoot him or beat him to death. And second, the physicality of it, knowing whether her body was strong enough to take his body and do harm to it. In my adult life, I've mustered low-grade resentment toward a boss who made me work over the weekend. I've flared with temporary rage at someone who cut me off in traffic. But when I recall the bearded man, the meter moves up the scale. Incited by a man who knew how to hurt, years of experience honed behind his methods, he didn't stop and consider. He didn't plot and scheme. It came natural. Fingers that grab and dig, hands that hold, then hit. When the bearded man closed me into the room that was not mine, I might have thought, I hate you. I might have thought, I wish you would die. A little girl clenching her fist, die. I might have thought that, but imagine my mother. She made a list of things to do. The list began with, get a gun. I was there when she went to ask her uncle for it, said she'd feel safer with it now that my father was gone. And the words did not come to me then, though I wanted to say them. Please don't give it to her. With the first item checked off her list, the next was, leave my daughter in the middle of the night, and the next, recruit 2 strong, able-bodied men to help me do what I cannot do alone. I am traveling to the gym on Wilshire Boulevard to know my mother's body, her strong arms, her svelte figure, her muscular back. My mother's body, like a map in my mind, I still reach for her in the middle of the night, just the cold sheet. I strive for a body like hers, but fail. There are times when I'm on the treadmill, when I'm running full out, like I'm running for my life, like I'm running to get back to her, even though that's impossible. I am coming for you. It's easy to judge my mother. I've heard others do it, say things like, she lost it, a screw came loose, she was a hot mess, she was a nightmare on wheels. Yeah, well, maybe I'll tell her to come for you next. She got 2 men to help her kidnap the bearded man at gunpoint. to bring him back to my childhood house and beat him within an inch of his life. I read the police reports. One account said she shot him 7 times, but didn't hit her mark. Another said they broke into his apartment, bound his hands behind his back, and put him in a car. Another said she held a knife to his throat and threatened to slit it. She hit him in the face with the gun. She hit him in the face with her fists. I imagine she could have said, "See, how do you like it? She came for you, motherfucker." Violence is never justified. Yet sometimes I think my mother was justified. At the gym, I do resistance training first. My muscles work mostly against the weight of memory. I do successive reps until the point of fatigue, until the point of failure. Tiny fibers in my sinew fire and burn until they twitch and shake. On the other side of this effort is me trying to become my mother's body like a map in my mind. I do plyometrics with explosive jumps, use the elastic properties of my muscles to propel myself through air. I try to land soft and with good form to protect my knees. Old injuries, they still haunt me. I need to be strong like my mother. You never know when you're gonna need it, because of course, a man like the bearded man would end up in my bed. He's had the same fingers. He put them in me among other things. When I first met him, he said, "I want to wreck you." I cuddled against his hot skin, thinking how sweet that he thinks he can, how sexy that he wanted to try. That story ended badly, as we both knew it would. He wrecked me and I let him. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Our next reader, Daniel Pearce, is a writer and musician living in San Francisco. He teaches at UC Santa Cruz and is at work on a novel about academic fraud and police misconduct. Please join me in welcoming Daniel Pearce.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Tammy. That was so powerful. And thanks everyone for being here. And also my deep thanks to Nick and to Janice and to everyone at the Martha Heasley Cox Center for Steinbeck Studies, and also to the other wonderful fellows. I think most of you are in the house. I'm not sure. So I'm going to be reading a section of the novel I'm working on, a section of the second chapter. So the book is sort of an unreliably narrated story about a graduate student in sociology. His name's David Lash. He's a rising star in the field, but he has secretly fabricated all of his work on police misconduct in New York City. And I guess I should say that that the novel draws on my own non-fictional experience as an investigator of police misconduct. So, and then just some quick context. So at this point, the narrator has just recently begun receiving these anonymous threatening notes suggesting that someone's onto his dishonesty. And at the start of this chapter, he's just left an award ceremony on his campus where he received this big early career award, and he's starting to freak out a bit. Okay, so I walked slowly from campus to the train, prolonging this moment to forestall the next until I couldn't anymore, until I'd reached the corner where the lantern-lit entrance to the subway station looked like a colonial toll booth and therefore seemed to beckon me warmly. With the award tenderly held and curdling in my fist, I descended to the subway platform, the turnstile giving me its click of admission just as the train pushed in. During the predictable span of the ride home, as the interior lights of my train car struggled to remain on and the wheels hissed hard underneath me, I sat and calculated risks. I'd have to do new field work, which was to say, I'd have to do field work. But what if this field work produced nothing of note? And what if that small form of repentance didn't protect me? The questions formed a loop, cinched by the absence of satisfactory answers, and I circled through them until my stop, where the subway was now a superway, halting along on its elevated track, and I moved down the stairs in a gravitational rush from the high platform to the street below. There were more police than there were by campus, and fewer of them smiling, as though the neighborhood's denizens were not the population that the officers intended to obligingly protect. There were other distinctions between the neighborhoods too, which I imagine the officers would catch. More cars double parked, more NYCHA buildings, that's the New York City Housing Authority, more cyclists on the sidewalk, more crushed Snapple bottles and severed zip ties, and losing scratch tickets in the gutters, a savory vegetal scent in the air. My building was a 6th-floor walk-up. The entrance, a discreet door, usually held open with a wedge of cardboard or a folded takeout menu, beside the storefront of a party supply shop. As I approached, a cheap inner tube with the print of a sprinkled donut swayed in the air like a tire swing from the awning it was tied to. I typically raced up the narrow, dark stairs to my apartment door, the one on the left upon reaching the 2nd floor, but because I had no reason now to hasten the future's arrival, I trudged, and in my weary slowness, I saw, as though for the first time, the old and numerous crowbar marks up and down my steel door, all with rust profiles as datable and unique as tree trunk rings. The door itself describing, now that I paused to listen, the various spasms of crime it had witnessed, every wave with its own relic of chipped paint and dented metal. The neighborhood had changed, the door said. All the old saws I expected from a Delphic stoop sitter. I let myself in and locked the door immediately behind me, hearing the loud industrial deadbolt slot back reassuringly into its holding. The light overhead was off, as I'd left it. Ever since moving to New York, I'd had this worry, that when I returned to my studio apartment, my belongings would appear slightly shifted, that my night reading, which I always left tented open against my bedside table, would now be shut flat, or that the morning's cooled cup of coffee would be resting not at the rightful center of my desk, but, say, atop the stack of deferred magazines that had gathered like sediment beside my sofa. All would be evidence less of a burglary than of a gaslighting, of the devious tricks played upon me by someone with the knowledge of the uncanny. My suspicions would always vanish when I discovered the undisturbed intactness of my private world, an intactness that I had almost come to expect more than doubt. It was an intactness I needed now. I flipped the 2 switches and the onrushing light revealed nothing obviously out of place. The ceiling fan began its strained acceleration and my itemizing gaze passed over the surfaces, desk, kitchen countertop, the cheap card table that, when properly draped with the sole tablecloth I owned, made a convincing dining table, only to find the room unchanged. But then the bathroom doorknob began to squeak and rotate. Intruders had intruded. I felt my body go heavy, even as circumstance tugged on me to do something decisive. I could hear my breathing, the fast, shallow breathing of a weakling, but the fear was leaden, and I was fixed in place as the person within the bathroom fiddled with the fussy doorknob. I always kept my bathroom light on, home security advice from Malcolm X's autobiography that I'd internalized, but that now seemed worthless, for my bluff had been called. Light radiated evenly from the crack beneath the door, but for the 2 dark exceptions of the intruder's feet. I grabbed the bluntest object within reach, the French press, and I raised the pathetic weapon above my head in hopes of coming across as a man prepared for violence. But it was Sam who wandered out, just Sam. He was altogether oblivious of me, his head aimed at the ceiling as though looking for water damage. Each of his nostrils held within it a bloody twist of toilet paper. "Oh, you're here," he said, like I was some unexpected and not altogether welcome guest. "I knocked before coming in." My heart, unresponsive to the facts on the ground, thrashed within me, and my breathing was still hard, even as I felt relief. "You call first, Sam. Notify me. Jesus." I was in the neighborhood, with a bloody nose. He gripped the bridge of his nose with thumb and forefinger, and he lowered his head to meet my eyes. His face seemed clenched, the folds of his brow like cellulite. "David, to be honest, someone was following me." His voice was quieter, more careful now. "In a black van, in a Econo line, and I couldn't run then. Once my nose started bleeding, I'd have looked like a crazy person." "Right. Well, I suppose I gave you my keys for a reason," I said, resigned. "You feeling steady?" Better now. I don't think they saw the building I ducked into, so don't worry too much. I doubt they'll find us here. They were whispering such creepy things at me. They'd pull up beside me just to whisper things like, narc, Sam said, hissing the last word. It seemed like a bad idea to ask Sam to describe, and thereby defend, his hallucinations. I thought it best to nod seriously, for this was serious, and listen. But listening was hard. The AC wasn't yet on, and the award was getting softer with each additional minute it spent in my hand. I only then realized that I'd been holding the award very gently so as not to crease it further. And the gigantic map of New York's police precincts, which I had pinned to the wall years ago, shortly after moving in, and which Sam now stood in front of, seemed newly gigantic and hectoring. I tried to look into Sam's eyes, but the map distracted me. At that scale, the precincts took on the appearance of nation states, with sawtooth borders of no obvious logic. Significant territories gathered within boroughs that looked, by virtue of the waters that surrounded them, continental. They were territories I would have to navigate imminently. Sam, it's a good surprise to see you, but I have stuff. You know, you keep a very warm apartment, David. Do you mind? Sam pointed a finger, stained a chalky red, at the AC unit in the window. Please. The machine beeped at his touch and chuffed on, supplying the room with a comforting baseline of noise that made conversation feel less necessary. David, I hope you know that I thank you for this. As a nonviolent person, I'm often forced to run. Knowing I have sanctuary here is, well, it's reassuring. The words were sweet, but they sounded remote somehow, as though Sam were merely talking to himself. I unfurled the award and placed it face down on my desk, then crawled onto the sofa. The current of air was pleasantly cool, chilling my sweaty back, and I wrapped myself in the coarse Afghan blanket I kept there. I came to Brooklyn to meet a date, Sam said, but she never showed. And so, in light of what led me to your place, I have to wonder what exactly her motives were, luring me out and then standing me up. I texted her, just to tell her I was onto her plot, but I haven't heard back. I closed my eyes. Sam's antipsychotics should have been doing a better job than they seem to be doing. In the last few months, since he transitioned to outpatient, he had been talking about the black vans less and less. But leading up to his hospitalization, such talk had been incessant. And whenever I had expressed any skepticism about the empirical reality of these vans, whose sole responsibility was, in Sam's telling, the harassment of good, honest people like himself, he would give a slow, wary nod, as though privately classifying me as one of the imperceptive ones. During Sam's long week of inpatient treatment, I had regarded his mental illness as a set of immediate practical problems. Who would pay? Who would keep him from killing himself? Was he even suicidal? Was this schizophrenia or just a discrete psychotic break? And while I could have called the hospital more often than I did, I had wanted to call every day. I had nonetheless remained in daily touch with Sam's rich parents, ultimately convincing them to suspend their promise never to pay for anything of Sam's ever again, a stupid promise to begin with, smacking as it did of the misplaced moral rigidity that I often noticed in the Republican wealthy. But Sam's illness had hardly offered up a practical problem for me since then. Really since his fourth day in the ward, when he'd called to tell me of the music workshop he'd just finished. It was the first time we'd managed to reach each other since his being checked in, and I was surprised by how he sounded. Rather than the listless, narcotized voice that I'd grown accustomed to over the past several months, this one was fast, even happy, for everyone there with him, he explained, had been given a tambourine or ukulele or shaker or djembe, and the instructor had activated a synthesized tambouridrone, which they'd all been encouraged to improvise over. And as they were building upon the drone with their strums and shakes and hits, Sam began vocalizing, his mouth opening as wide as it would go, forming tones of pure emotion. And when the others joined him, he'd felt like they were together ascending the Tower of Babel. Don't read too much into that, Sam had warned me. And he then realized that this was truth, that the black vans, filled with anonymous tormentors, were just illusions, confected by a miserable mind in order to ensure that mind's own continued misery. And, well, he wasn't going to sit down and take that anymore. My relief upon hearing this was immense, and would have been more so if I'd only been able to shake the feeling that all declarations of clarity of vision were inherently suspicious, not least those catalyzed by music. Still, this was better. This was good. I guess I can stop there.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Our third reader tonight, Anthony Veasna So, is a queer Cambodian-American writer from Stockton, California. He holds a BA from Stanford and an MFA from Syracuse, where he received a university fellowship, the Joyce Carol Oates Award in Fiction, and a P.D. Soros Fellowship. His writing has appeared or is forthcoming in The New Yorker, N+1, Granta, and Ziziva, and his comics have appeared in Hobart and Nashville Review. He's at work on a novel about 3 Cambodian-American cousins, a rapper, a stand-up comedian, and an illustrator, and his story collection After Parties is forthcoming from Echo HarperCollins in the summer of 2021. Please welcome Anthony Veasna So.
Hopefully my internet's not like horrendous right now. I'm not sure. I'm like fine right now, right? Like,
Yep, sounds good.
okay. Okay. So I'm gonna read a little bit of chapter 2 of my novel. The novel is called Straight Through Campbelltown, and it's just essentially what happened is that their aunt Po, or like Ming Po, has like died, and Darren and Vinny are kind of in the Bay Area, and so Darren is gonna go to Vinny's concert, and they're gonna drive home at the end of the chapter to home downstate to like Long Beach, California. So that's just like the premise. It's just to like so you could like follow along. Okay, so it's like chapter 2. The chapters is called Darren and Vinny. Okay. 3 days after Poe's death, as he rode to Oakland for his cousin's concert, Darren found himself remembering a wisecrack he said to Vinny around 10 years before. The memory right then was so vivid and real, he told me in our first of many conversations. His subconscious had conjured it, despite that metallic roar of the BART. The night of the wisecrack was Darren's 18th birthday, and of course Vinny and him were at Little Caesars, splitting a $5 pizza and $2 garlic sticks. Finally, both of them had made it. They were goddamn adults. They could splurge on lottery tickets and cigarettes. They possessed the power to vote and sway elections, and now, hypothetically, choose how they lived their lives. What's really wild, Darren said, slathering hoisin sauce and chili oil onto his slice, totally more wild than turning 18, is how Cambo Frost sat start middle school, and then, all of a sudden, they're in fucking crisis mode. You know, because you got to decide whether you're going to be yellow or brown. Vinny spit out his drink, drenching his paper plate, and cracked up. Fucking shit, Vinny, Darren said. It's bad enough you drink Code Red Mountain Dew like an obese 10-year-old. Sorry, man, but damn, that's some real talk, Vinny said. Real like these dope sauces you brought. He flicked his wrists, pointed at the swirls of dark red hoisin, and slapped his stomach with both hands. That's best pizza I've had. At the time, Darren thought of comedy as philosophy. No matter how flippant, jokes had the potential of feeling cosmically true, as if the whole universe would align and cohere when refracted through far-fetched premises, all skewed with enough absurdity to convey real clarity, ideas never before thought, radical understandings of the world. That zinger he told on his 18th birthday was no different, though hardly a joke. He really did see an ethical, spiritual, potentially existential, and maybe even ancestral dilemma, and the way Campbell Frost were forced to decide on champion string quartets or Wu-Tang listening parties to live either as mainstream Asian nerds or wannabe off-brand gangsters. Generations of the tightest cliques of young Campbell Frost, time and time again, reached breaking points once the first pimples had emerged from the epidermal surface of those baby-cheeked faces. Upon entering high school, some Campbell Frost would arm themselves with colossal backpacks stuffed with textbooks and rolling on tiny wheels, while other Frosts would sport wife beaters and jeans that draped over their asses. They spent their weekends spitting donuts on empty lots, car seats reeking of skunk, finished joints littering the concrete, as their counterparts were chugging Red Bulls and snorting Radical at study parties, cramming SAT and AP vocabulary terms into their swollen brains. Repping Khmer was off the table straight up, Darren ranted to Vinny with mouthful of dough marinara Italian seasoning. No, you're required to identify as yellow or brown, assimilated into the whites or the black people of Asians if you wanted to be hardcore and ignorant. It was the simplest form of survival in the US, of dealing with the burden of my ancestry, of living in the aftermath of a genocide no one else remembered, let alone bothered to learn about. Unless, of course, you wanted a hellish eternity of explaining the history of Cambodia, and most likely its literal location to dumbass people. Whenever he struck gold with a great punchline, Darren saw himself as a genius, his every glib observation providing crucial evidence of a groundbreaking theory. And he felt seriously brilliant that night when he realized, while sitting in Vinny's car with Little Caesar's acid reflux, high out of his mind on a birthday joint, that Campbelltown's surrounding urban geography corroborated his joke on the moral yellow-brown dilemma plaguing young and restless Pross. Campbelltown, after all, sat under South Los Angeles and Compton, flanked on either side by Torrance and Westminster. Hardly any Campbell children or refugees ever dreamed of staying in their hometown, stuck without career prospects inside that 5x5 grid of donut shops, jewelry stores, DVD stores loaning out karaoke videos from the homeland. But then the question presented itself. Should Cambo Pross face north toward the Latino and Black populations of Compton and affiliate themselves with subversive ethos of rappers like NWA? Or was it better to charge outward in lateral directions, west for the humble Korean and Japanese enclaves of Torrance, east if the solution was to sell your soul to corporate America and burrow deeper into assimilation, passing through Westminster, that haven of dim sum restaurants, till you hit the OC mansions, Irvine's model minority suburbs, that median household income of $90K a year? Darren was reminded of this old wisecrack of his nearly a decade after its first utterance, as he contemplated Vinny's own very funny philosophy of life. Apparently, the answer to the world's most crippling systemic problems, Darren had recently learned. This new philosophy upheld one life motto, a single and resolute tenet. Society was in dire need of good Cambo dick. Specifically Vinny's Cambo dick, which was a fine piece of machinery, supposedly, as 10,000 YouTube viewers, and now semi-repulsed Darren had come to know listening to the underground rapper's biggest hit to date. All afternoon, while skimming humorless texts on the theory of comedy in the dusty stacks of Stanford's library, Darren had played Vinny's song on repeat, his ears ringing with those auto-tuned voices of the Khmer Kong rappers. Half-sung raps laid over an uproarious beat of steel drum rhythms and background vocalists shouting good vibe chants. It was as though the god of verbose swagger had miraculously fused with the god of cheeky energy, only for Vinny to crank up the tempo and volume through an unbroken manic crescendo lasting a whopping 6 minutes and 24 minutes. Darren had to admit, Sakrat Tom, or Big Sausage, fucking blew his mind. Sweating on the Richmond line under 100 feet of ocean via the Trans-Bay Tube, Darren found himself still listening to Sakrat Tom, still thinking of that joke from his 18th birthday. The year was 2014, 3 decades after the first Cambo refugees had settled in California. And here was Darren at the age of 28, completely unable to pinpoint how his experiences had produced the adult he now was. A goatee on his chin to prove he could grow facial hair, he wore tortoiseshell eyeglasses and Oxford shirts. His medium-length black hair, which he gelled and parted and slicked into unnatural waves, gave him the look of being in perpetual attendance of an elitist networking event, the kind catered with seasonal IPAs and tiny quiches, which was his world now, really, wasn't it? A PhD student at some prestigious university, he studied the philosophy of comedy in a bullshit department called Modern Thought and Literature. On one hand, he was proud of his accomplishments. I figured he was Stanford's only Cambodian PhD in humanities. But on the other, how the hell did he get so damn white? Yes, everyone felt it. His friends and family had discerned it, how far removed Darren stood from all those years of shitty open mics. From his early 20s of flannel shirts and backwards turned hats, when he opened 2-minute comedy sets in the Tenderloin by shouting, hello, I'm Darren, that is my name, and I'm Cambodian. So you're welcome. Now you know a Cambodian guy. You can cross that off your fucked up list of obscure ethnicities you're trying to meet, you monsters. Because I know you guys are always playing racial bingo or whatever behind our backs, trying to make like Pokemon and collect them all. But seriously, being Cambodian is weird. I'm off-brand Asian, I have less in common with mainstream Asians like Chinese, Japanese, the usual suspects, than say middle-aged Jewish people. Because, and let me be real for you for a second before I start talking boners or some shit, both older Jewish folks and young Campbells have parents who either survived or died in genocide. And then there was Vinny. Darren's cousin was the first Campbell rapper to break into the hip hop scene, with tattoos traversing his chest and crawling up his neck. With that rolled up bandana always tied around his forehead, even though he kept his head shaved, he spit out rhymes about his supposedly impressive dick like he was the second coming of the Yin Yang twins and Wait the Whisper song. Maybe this is why the two cousins had grown apart over the past 2 years, to the point that Darren hadn't even known Vinny was recording a new song. 10 years after graduating high school, Darren and Vinny had assimilated the opposite sides of the Campbell-Prof racial complex spectrum. His train emerged out of the water and charged into West Oakland, and Darren felt relieved to see a flash of purple-orange sky, those docks that looked obsolete. It always shot his nerves, the bar, with its permanent stench of the homeless and tech workers steeped in Axe deodorant, with its gray-blue seating that depressed everyone. Whenever he rode to Oakland, he had to reassure himself. The people in the Transbay Tube at the bottom of the bay, they were the safest, they really were, from the big 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, so he hardly visited Oakland. He looked around at the other passengers, half hoping to find, in the reflections lurking in the windows and the faces of middle-aged Asian women, an image of his Mingfo. A dull pang throbbed in his chest. Heaviness slid over his eyes. All he had left of her were his shoddy memories. I think I'll finish there just because of like coherence.
Thanks, Anthony. I got to say, I like almost everything about digital readings. I like the fact that the audience can come from wherever they happen to be. I like the fact that I can be in my pajamas if I want, or, you know, making dinner if I want. Not when you're the host, obviously, but, you know, when you're listening. But the one thing that digital readings lack is a way to make applause. You know, you read and then silence. But much applause is deserved for those 3 readings. Thank you so much, Tammy, Daniel, and Anthony. So now we have plenty of questions for, plenty of time for questions. So if you have a question and you want to ask it yourself, just type question in the chat and I'll call on you. Or if you want to type your question in the chat, I'll read it for you. So, yeah, everybody's chatting their appreciation right now. This is a very, I can't decide if this experience is like primarily digital or primarily 2020. Maybe equal parts both. But I have a question just to get you started, and it has to do with 2020, which is, you know, I feel like among my writer friends, half of them are saying, I feel artistically stunted because I haven't seen any people in person in so long and I haven't traveled anywhere. And then the other half are like, this is the greatest thing that ever happened because I can just like lock myself in a room and work. Where do you guys stand on that? Start with Tammy.
Well, it's a terrible year, right? Election year, COVID year. My family's really having hardship being in Hawaii. It's a tourism industry and they're really hard hit. So food lines, I mean, every day it's just another headline and it's been really hard. But I think because I had this fellowship that I knew I had proposed to them that I would finish my book, I did try and focus on that. So that kept me very motivated. And I do have a writing group. We get online on Zoom, and some of my peeps were here today. We write together. That helps too. We talk about, you know, just before we start, what we're going to work on and how it's going, that kind of thing. And that's been a great help for me.
Daniel?
Yeah, echoing much of what Tammy said. I mean, just a phenomenally awful year, and I think I've spent much of it in, I guess, struggling to actually get, you know, real deep work done without the, you know, like incursions of you know, current events and tragedy and all of that. So, but I have also, I don't know, I guess taken more deeply to writing longhand, just because my life has become so dominated by screens. And I think I've actually started to just savor the act of writing a lot more. I think there have definitely been times when writing has felt like this sort of perfunctory thing that I'm doing because I told myself I had to do it or something. Whereas like now it represents a kind of space of like slowness and stillness and calm and kind of apartness from the internet. So that's kind of been my experience so far.
Thanks. Anthony, do you want to answer that question, or maybe another one that comes from your fellow Kate? Biggest revision you've made to your novel or work so far this year?
Yeah, I've been mostly revising lately. But in terms of like COVID, I like kind of, I don't know, this might just sound like intense, but I kind of just think it's like the least I can do like in COVID, like right, like was like my life isn't like that hard right now. Like it was just like I might as well be working. I don't know. My dad and my parents were like refugees of the genocide and the Cambodian genocide, and so like my entire life it was always just like you should be working if you can because like your life isn't that hard. And even to this day, like in COVID, even when the smoke was going on, my dad's a mechanic, so he's an essential worker. So he's just been working this whole time. So it's kind of, I don't know, when I'm in times like this, I'm just like I just think it's like it's the least I could do is to like work a bunch. I don't know. And the biggest revision I had for my novel is I had this like really weird like inkling where like I just like couldn't stand the idea. I didn't want to write in first person because I wanted to be able to jump into like interiority and things like that. But I could not stand the idea of like having like a narrator that could be read as being like raceless, you know, like sort of like this like objective third person narrator. And it's like really was like bothering me. I was just like, it has to be like some sort of like the voice has to be like Cambodian American, like it has to just be concretely that. So then I kind of came up with this idea, this like like organizing principle that the narrator and the way that the novel structured would be like this like oral historian who's like Cambodian, who's like collected interviews of everyone involved because this is like a pivotal moment of like Cambo Town history. And he just like is right. He like, but then he's like sort of like he's like sort of modeled off of like Nietzsche or like Ishmael from like Moby Dick, where he kind of just like takes liberties because he supposedly has like permission, right? So he just like takes liberties into like jumping into people's interiority and mind. And there's like different moments where he kind of like takes a step back and he was like, whoa, like I might be like overstepping here. But I don't know, like so that was like my big revision I've made so far, and it kind of like restructured everything. But I guess like the TLDR of that, it's just like if something is like if something like keeps bothering you, maybe like do something about it.
That's great advice. Tammy, do you want to speak at all about revision that you've been working on?
Yes, revision. I mean, I've been overhauling my whole memoir this fall, and trying to look at areas that I'm really weak in, like plot, and trying to, you know, I tend to like to write in a very poetic, lyrical way, and then to try and coalesce that with plot has been definitely a challenge for me. And I think it has strengthened the story though. So that's what I've been working on a lot in my revision.
How about you, Daniel?
Well, I think there was a point, this was actually, I think, just before I applied, when I just completely changed the perspective of the novel. I think for like, you know, similar, but obviously like quite different reasons, the ones that Anthony was articulating, of just like not being content with this sort of received like close third mode that, you know, I think is drilled into a lot of writers by like mediocre pedagogues in creative writing programs. Not that any of my actual teachers were that way. They were all like really wonderful, but I think you sort of, like pick up certain habits and treat them as imperatives just from reading widely or not so widely in my case. And so, yeah, finding this this like first person voice that sort of really owned some of the ugliness of this character. I think that was probably the biggest one. But then, yeah, and I think all of the ones that I've done since the fellowship has started have been like so kind of like irritatingly specific to my project that they aren't even like worth trying to summarize. So
Well, let me ask you another question that maybe hopefully isn't irritating, but is definitely relevant to your project. From another fellow, Rita Chang Epic, asks you,
oh, hi Rita.
how much research did you have to do regarding police misconduct and academic culture for this novel?
I mean, I think a lot of it, I knew like really from when I like started working as an investigator that I would want to write about it, but it was just, a matter of like finding like a satisfactory like fictional form or vehicle for some of like the things that were like preoccupying me about that experience. And yeah, and I found a bunch of really terrible vehicles before I found this one that at least held my interest. But I also, as a writer, I feel, I think like a lot of writers have like terrible imposter syndrome and don't feel kind of like qualified to weigh in on a topic, particularly a topic as fraught as policing, unless I've just like read and watched and thought about a lot. So I have like a whole I actually still I have this like shelf of like books that I read for this project that I like won't bother to enumerate for you, but I guess like a fair amount of research. The academic fraud stuff was less something that I did read a fair amount about, but not nearly as much as I read about policing.
Mm-hmm. So the next question's for Tammy, comes from Kelly Huffman. I loved the incantory quality of your story and the repeated line, "I'm coming for you." How does your study of poetry influence your memoir, and how do you cross over?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a poet, and I feel like I was happy that to some extent in my writing, I can be lyrical. There is an essay I wrote called "I Want to Fuck Your Poem." So I feel that passionately about poetry that there's times when I want to get it on with poetry. And I do this a lot in my class. I teach a free class once a month where I use poetry to help people write. And I feel like my normal day is so linear that I love the dissociative nature of poetry. I love music a lot too. I was just talking to a writer and I got the sense that he would listen to really weird music. So I asked him what he was listening to and he gave me some music and I was listening to it and I was like trying to write to it. And I was like, wow, if this song could be an essay, and I was trying to get into writing something like that. So I think a lot of times when I'm especially writing something emotional, I think of it like as a song or a poem. So I thought of this as a poem to my mom.
It's beautiful. Thanks. I love that there are so many current and former Steinbeck fellows on the call here. This one comes from Cora Stryker. Cora, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Go
Hey
ahead.
everyone, great readings. Really amazing work. I wanted to know, obviously many books, many authors have influenced you, but if you had to pick one that sort of like the grandparent of the book you're working on, like the book without which your book would not exist, what would it be for each of you?
Excellent, difficult question.
I know it's impossible. I know the answer is every book you've ever read, but if you had to pick one.
And if you want to be a professional writer, you have to be prepared to answer this question.
Did I just go all Terry Gross on that? Sorry.
Yeah. Anthony, you want to take that one?
I mean, I already mentioned the book, but like the first English class I took in college, which was like I was very desperate at the time because I had failed like 4 computer science classes in a row, and like needed to like just like major in something. But the first English like class I took was like this lecture, and it was like called like Literary History B. It was after like Literary History A, which was like Chaucer and like Shakespeare. But all the like normal, all the like Victorianists and like Romanticists were just like gone that semester. So like, instead of like teaching us like 200 years of poetry, we did 5 weeks on Paradise Lost, and then like 5 weeks on Moby Dick, which was a pretty like absurd way to like start an English like major and start like a culture, a life of like reading. But like both those books, honestly, just like I've just returned to like over and over again. Like Stockholm Syndrome. I've read Moby Dick like 5 times over. And then Paradise Lost, I just like love it. I think it's like the most like psychedelic book I've ever written. But I mean, in terms of like recent books, I probably wouldn't have been able to like figure out the sort of like positioning of my book without Paul Beatty's The Sellout. But yeah.
Great answer. Daniel?
I second the recommendation of The Sellout. I think for me, I would probably say this novel Reef by Ramesh Gunasekera, which is like a Bildungsroman set in Sri Lanka. Just wonderful, domestic, subtly narrated book. I think it won the Booker when it the year it was published, sometime in the early 90s, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, that voice was definitely a huge influence. It's not like a loudly comic novel. Not that like mine really seeks to be, but yeah.
Tammy?
I think what immediately came to mind was Lydia Yuknovich's Chronology of Water, and like if that got it on with Animal Dreams from Barbara Kingsolver. I do like to write from the body, and I loved the dreams in Animal Dreams. So
Wonderful. I think we have time for a couple more questions. If someone out there wants to drop their hook in the water. I just love talking about the books. I mean, I could do book recommendations all night. So what are you guys looking forward to reading over Christmas break?
I'm really excited about Luster by
Raven Leilani.
Yes, Raven Leilani. The first chapter blew my mind. Can't wait to finish it.
I'm like halfway through What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez, and I love it. I mean, I thought The Friend was like the perfect novel, like in terms of what it was doing. Like it was just like perfectly structured, and like I think this book kind of like matches it. I kind of suspect that this new book was like a part of The Friend, and then like she like cut it off and like turned it into like another book. But I actually think it's like better for it. Like I think I like how they like speak to each other. But
Daniel?
Yeah, let's see. I just started Susan Taubes' novel Divorcing, which just got the NYRB Classics treatment. That's really good so far. Nick, is your arm okay?
Oh, my arm. I
Yeah.
broke my wrist skateboarding.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
it's a very cool way for
That's what
wrist
everybody
to get
says,
injured,
but
but
it's just broken all the same.
sorry.
But it's healing up. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. I don't know if you guys like Diane Cook. She's speculative writer with a strong feminist angle. Sort of like, I guess the grandmother of her work would be Margaret Atwood. But she's, I had dinner with her once. That's my claim to fame. But my wife's already read it and said it was just fantastic, and it's been on my shelf and waiting for the end of the semester. I also recently read A Burning by Megha Majumdar. That was terrific.
Is that as good as everyone says it is?
I thought so. I mean, I love Indian fiction, and this one takes place in, it's never named, but I think Calcutta. And it's just got so many interesting characters. It's about a Muslim high school girl who is falsely accused of a terrorist act. And then another point of view character is this PE teacher who goes on to become a political operative in a Hindu nationalist party. And so it's just fascinating. Oh, and then the third point of view character is a Hijra, which is a traditional Hindu trans person. Who's these trans people in traditional Hindu culture are thought to have certain magical properties and the ability to bestow blessings and that kind of thing. And but of course, his life is not great. I don't know. I thought it was a really good book, and she has extreme control of her language as well. That there's a lot to admire there. Anybody else in the audience want to jump in with some books? Feel free. Drop them in the chat or just unmute yourself and go for it.
I think there's a couple more questions.
Oh, there are. I
Yeah.
see. Lily, Marshall.
Hey, I had a question for everyone that I like to ask the authors who are currently writing something. Is there a particular emotion or feeling that you want to try and evoke in your readers?
Would any of our three readers like to take the question? Anthony?
I mean, I got like really drunk one time, and just like started like screaming. It was like in my MFA, and I started just like screaming about to like everyone about like what all I wanted all my work to be was to communicate like an exuberant grief. So I guess that's like the emotion.
Tammy, Daniel?
There we go. Okay, cool. I would say, I mean, Anthony's answer is much more specific than mine. So I feel silly saying it, but you know, I think just you know, sense of like just full absorption, and then maybe a kind of like you know, reluctant or like surprised identification, I guess I would say. Yeah.
Tammy?
Yeah, I related to what Anthony was saying about exuberant, like anger. That line came to me, I'm coming for you, when I was actually driving, and I just thought my mother must have said that, and I just just thought about how angry that I was about the whole situation. And I feel like it became a piece about anger.
Excellent. I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much for reading tonight, Daniel, Anthony, and Tammy. And thank the rest of you for coming out or coming into your computer to listen to us. And I want to remind you that the other three readers from this Steinbeck Fellow class will be reading on April 22nd. So mark your calendar or check back on the Steinbeck Center webpage or check your email. And I hope to see you then. Thank you so much, everyone, and good night.